Well, let's speak to the former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
Just give us your reaction, firstly, when you first heard what had gone on here and this trial had kind of almost mysteriously, or some might say not quite so mysteriously when you look into it, but what was your first reaction when you realised what had happened here?
I was completely flabbergasted. The idea that China is not a threat to national security it's unbelievable that no one in government was prepared to make a statement to that end. Do you want me to list why it's a threat to national security?
Well, I tell you what, it wouldn't be a bad idea. You've been in the hot seat, so you know exactly what you're looking at when it comes to countries that could have an area of concern about the way they behave and the way they trade and act and all the rest of it. Just give us an overview then as to why China is really not a country to be trusted.
Well, for a start, you had the Director General of the Security Service some time ago standing up in public and saying they were the most serious threat to our national security of any single nation. So there we have a clear statement. In addition to that, you've got hostile cyber activity against the UK. You've got Chinese support for the war in Ukraine, which is probably crucial to the Russians' military performance there. You have spying on Parliament, these two gentlemen who clearly had some relationship with Chinese intelligence and passed material to them. You have China harassing Royal Naval warships in international waters sailing through the cross-strait issue. You have a defence policy which is based on an alliance with Australia, AUKUS, where we're going to help them build nuclear submarines to meet the Chinese threat in the Pacific. You have them stealing intellectual property in our universities. All right, I can go on, but that'll give you a fair idea.
Indeed, and I think most people, I mean, certainly senior politicians would be aware of all of this stuff. And this case, and I'll say this in sort of layman's terms, Richard, and I'm sure you can correct me, but broadly speaking, if the court case, wasn't going to acknowledge China as a threat in one form or another, then the very foundations of that case would therefore be not just diluted, but diminished to the point that the case collapses. That's broadly what's happened.
Yeah. I mean, the legislation is complicated here because the prosecution was brought under the 1911 Official Secrets Act, which is a pretty clunky piece of legislation, which hasn't been changed, and I think does place emphasis on the word enemy. But my understanding is we've actually never had a sort of formal list of the UK's enemies, and that you can make a prosecution on the grounds if you can prove damage to national security. Now, I've just listed why there is damage to national security. Okay, since then the act has changed. You've now got it's the Registration of Foreign Interests Act, and it's much easier to prosecute under that new law. But I think the earlier case is clean cut. The law is pretty clean cut, and I just cannot understand why the National Security Advisor or his deputy couldn't make a statement to that end about China. If they were willing to make it, why didn't they ask the Director General of MI5?
Well,
why
indeed.
didn't they ask the retiring head of MI6 who had just left office? I mean, there are all sorts of... Why didn't they ask someone like me? And there's a whole crowd of people around who have massive knowledge on this issue.
I was going to say, I would imagine, and I don't think this breaches any of that Official Secrets Act that you just mentioned, that when you were head of MI6, a week or maybe even a day wouldn't pass, possibly even an hour, without a file marked China on it coming across your desk.
Pretty much, that's the case. They have very hostile intelligence services. There are 3 organizations which are a serious problem, and all of them, I'm sure, are active in the United Kingdom. We had a case recently with this solicitor, Christine Lee, who was being financed by something called the United Front Works Department, who had been trying to suborn and entertain MPs. The moment she was identified and questioned by the security service, she did a runner, disappeared back to communist China.
Yeah. In terms of the sort of political angle of this, because it does, it just certainly feels that this is very political. The government want to, they want to maintain some kind of relationship with China. They don't want inconvenient court cases that are going to somehow besmirch China's good name. I say that with tongue in cheek. They want to make sure that they've got nice clean decks and they can deal with this regime, which after all is still a communist regime, despite what the veneer tells us. Is it as simple as that this was really, if to put it another way, a PR job for the government?
Well, I'm mystified because, the one thing the Chinese understand is reciprocity. We treat them like they treat us. The idea that we are prosecuting 2 of their spies, do we really think it'll affect trade with China?
Yeah.
There are many countries that have had to deal with this problem, the United States frequently. The best case is Australia. The Australians have not been reticent about prosecuting, aggressive Chinese espionage activity. And look, their economy is far more bound up with China than any other Western nation. So I really don't understand what happens. If it's a legal cock-up, it is one of massive inconfidence, bearing in mind, we have a prime minister who's a former DPP. I mean, what on earth are we dealing with? You can't say it's a legal issue and claim it's a sort of accident of misadministration, or you can't, both ways it's absurd.
Well, I'm sure, therefore, you will be intrigued to know what kind of response or further response we're going to get from Sir Keir Starmer. We know that the Kemi Badenoch and others, naturally it's her job, she's the official opposition, are going to push him on this. I would assume this week at Prime Minister's Question Time. Are you hopeful in any way? What does your instinct tell you in terms of the response that we might hear from the government?
Well, I think they're in a very tricky place. How are they going to explain their way around this? And when a minister goes on television, as Bridget Phillipson did, and uses clearly a very carefully calculated phrase about substance or evidence, you know that there's a fire underneath the smoke. She wouldn't use a phrase like that. It's like the famous, there are lots of famous legal phrases in past scandals where ministers have tried to worm their way around and then say, oh, well, we didn't lie on this.
Yeah, we never actually said that.
There's clearly a problem here. We don't know quite what the proportions are, and we don't know who's involved. But clearly the office of the National Security Advisor must be the place that we look first, and that is Jonathan Powell. And, I'd be keen to know how he would explain himself. Of course, he's not going to be sitting in Parliament. The questions can go to the Prime Minister or the Foreign Secretary or one of the senior ministers of the government. But I think they are in a mess on this. How
important is it, Sir Richard, that we get to the bottom of this? I mean, this is what tends to happen with kind of cases of controversy, and I think this goes sort of slightly beyond a little bit of controversy, is they're sort of kicked into the long grass, and maybe at some point somebody says, oh, we'll have an inquiry, or we'll bring in a barrister to have a look into it, or something like that. That may happen, but just give us an indication of how serious you think this is and why we do really need to know more about it.
Well, China's a very important trading partner of the UK. I'm not an isolationist. I don't think any of us are. We have to have a relationship with them. And we need to have a relationship based on reciprocity and understanding that certain activities, if they're caught out and we're caught out, if we're caught spying in China, we're going to be in deep trouble with the Chinese government. Someone's going to get prosecuted. No beating about the bush. Do we really think they're going to sweep it under the carpet? No, they're not. And similarly, we have to have a relationship that we understand. You've also got a pending issue of some importance, which is the planning permission for this mighty Chinese embassy in the old Royal Mint building on the edge of the city, well, right on the City of London. And, this is going to play into that issue. I gather the British government also want to do some changes or increase the building work at our embassy in Beijing. These things have to be sorted out. And we have to be direct with the Chinese and say, no, you can't. If you do this, you're going to get hit by us. And similarly, we would expect the same thing to happen in the other direction.
You might think so. Listen, Sir Richard, it's been great to have you on, sir. Thank you for being with us. Sir Richard Dearlove is the former head of MI6. There's not a lot he doesn't know about areas such as which countries pose a bit of a threat and in which ways. And that was just the stuff he could talk about.